giant Cowboy waited for his mail-order bride, and obese 18-year-old knocked on his door. He was a giant cowboy, alone on the frontier, waiting for the woman he'd paid to marry. The wind howled, the snow fell heavy, and then came the knock that changed everything. On his doorstep stood not the bride he expected, but a desperate 18-year-old girl, shivering, unwanted, cast aside by her own kin. He should have turned her away. Instead, he let her in. But soon the town whispered. Church bells rang with scorn. Doors were slammed, and a deacon swore she would never stand as a bride beneath God's roof. Still, in the quiet of a lantern-lit cabin, something unshakable grew. Faith, courage, and a love no one saw coming. Yet when the wedding day dawned, a locked church door turned joy into shame and drove her into the storm. Would mercy and devotion be enough to break through pride, silence the gossip, and prove that the girl no one wanted was the answer to his prayers? Before we begin, drop a hello in the comments. Share your corner of the world and how you're feeling today. It's a beautiful thing to witness how stories can connect us across oceans, languages, and lives. The winter wind howled through the mountain peaks as Boaz McGraw stood on his cabin's wooden porch, his massive frame casting a long shadow in the fading light. Snowflakes drifted down like feathers, coating the narrow trail that wound its way up to his homestead. His calloused hands gripped the porch railing as he gazed out at the gathering dusk. "Lord," he whispered, his breath visible in the cold air. "I ain't asking for much, just someone to share this life with." His voice, usually steady and sure when working with cattle, trembled slightly. "Someone who might see past all my roughness." The cabin behind him stood neat and welcoming, a testament to days of preparation. He'd scrubbed every surface until his hands were raw and red, hung fresh curtains in the windows, and laid out his mother's cherished quilt on the spare bed. The hearth glowed with warmth, and beside it sat a fresh loaf of bread he'd traded for in town. As evening settled over the mountains like a heavy blanket, Boaz's shoulders slumped. The Boston school teacher he'd been corresponding with should have arrived on today's stage. He'd even written out careful directions to his ranch, paying the shopkeeper's boy to copy them in his neat hand. With heavy steps, Boaz returned inside. The cabin's single room felt vast and empty, despite its modest size. He settled at his table, the wood smooth from years of use, and bowed his head over a simple supper of beans and bread. The tick of his mother's old clock on the mantel kept lonely time as he ate. Hours crept by like molasses in winter. Boaz sat in his father's old rocker by the fire, trying to find comfort in the familiar creak of wood against wood. The clock struck midnight, each chime echoing in the silence. Then came the pounding. The sudden noise jerked Boaz from his half-doze. The desperate hammering continued, urgent and weak all at once. He grabbed his lantern and crossed to the door in 3 long strides, his heart thundering in his chest. The door swung open to reveal a sight that stopped his breath. There, swaying on his doorstep, stood a young woman. She was large-bodied, her dress torn and muddied, her face pale with cold. Dark hair escaped from what must have once been a neat bun, and her eyes held a mix of desperation and determination that struck him to his core. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Are you Boaz McGraw?" "I am," he answered softly, afraid his usual rumble might frighten her. "I'm Levi May Benson." She swallowed hard, struggling to stay upright. "My father, he left me in Denver. I heard talk of a rancher up north, seeking a wife. I followed the rumors, asked in every town." Her words began to slur, her body swaying dangerously. Boaz didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, catching her just as her knees buckled. She felt cold as ice in his arms, her clothes damp with snow. With gentle care that belied his size, he lifted her and carried her into the cabin's warmth. "Easy now," he murmured, settling her in the chair closest to the fire. He wrapped his mother's quilt around her shoulders, noting how she clutched it tight, as if afraid it might be taken away. "Let me fetch you some warm tea." While the water heated, Levi May began to speak, her voice growing stronger as warmth returned to her body. Father always said I was too much trouble, too different from other girls. She stared into the fire, fingers tracing the quilt's pattern. When we reached Denver, he just left. No word, no note. Just gone one morning with all our money. Boaz handed her the steaming cup, careful not to let their fingers touch and startle her. "Ain't right," he said softly, "leaving kin like that." "I didn't know what to do," she continued. "Then I heard about you in a general store. People said you were looking for a wife, that you had a good heart." She looked up at him then, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "I know I'm not what you were expecting. I'm not a Boston school teacher. I'm just me." Boaz settled into his father's rocker, moving slowly so as not to frighten her with his sighs. "Tell me more," he said gently, watching as color gradually returned to her cheeks. The fire crackled between them as Levi May shared her story. She spoke of walking until her shoes wore through, of kind farmers who offered rides in their wagons, of following the trail north through the early winter snow. All the while, Boaz listened, his heart aching at the courage it must have taken for this young woman to make such a journey alone. "I know this isn't proper," she finally said, her voice small but steady. "Coming here uninvited, with nothing to my name but the clothes I'm wearing, but I had nowhere else to go, and something in my heart told me to find you." Boaz leaned forward in his chair, choosing his words carefully. "Miss Benson, Levi May, there ain't nothing improper about seeking safety. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need, no strings attached. We can figure out the rest come morning." Relief flooded her face, and for the first time, a small smile curved her lips. "Thank you, Mr. McGraw. I was so afraid you'd turn me away." "Boaz," he corrected gently, "and no one gets turned away from my door on a night like this." He stood and retrieved extra blankets from the chest by his bed. "You take the bed tonight. I'll sleep fine here by the fire." As he arranged a makeshift bed for himself, he heard her soft voice once more. "Boaz, thank you for answering the door tonight." He looked up to find her watching him, the firelight softening her features. "Much obliged for knocking," he replied simply, and was rewarded with another small smile. The mountain winds continued their lonely song outside, but inside the cabin, something had changed. Where there had been emptiness, now there was possibility. Where there had been silence, now there was the soft sound of another person's breathing. And in the heart of a gentle giant of a cowboy, there bloomed a cautious hope that perhaps God had answered his prayers after all, just not in the way he'd expected. Morning sunlight crept through the cabin's frosted windows, painting golden stripes across the worn floorboards. Levi May stirred beneath the warmth of the patchwork quilt, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. As awareness returned, her cheeks flushed hot with shame. Here she was, uninvited and oversized, taking up space in a stranger's bed. She could hear Boaz moving quietly by the hearth, the soft clink of cast iron and the sizzle of breakfast cooking. The sense of coffee and bacon made her stomach clench with hunger, but she hesitated to rise. What must he think of her, showing up in the dead of night, desperate as a stray cat? "Morning, Miss Benson," Boaz's deep voice carried across the cabin. "Breakfast is near ready if you're of a mind to eat." Gathering her courage, Levi May pushed back the quilt and smoothed her wrinkled dress as best she could. Her fingers caught on tears she hadn't even noticed in the dark. "I'm sorry to be such a burden, Mr. McGraw." "Boaz," he corrected gently, not turning from the stove. "And food ain't never a burden when there's plenty to share." She made her way to the table, trying to make herself smaller somehow, though she knew it was impossible. Boaz set a plate before her, heaped with eggs and thick-cut bacon. Her hands trembled as she picked up the fork, trying to eat slowly despite her hunger. "There's more if you want it," Boaz said, settling across from her with his own plate. His eyes were kind beneath the brim of his hat, noting her shaking hands but making no mention of them. When she'd eaten her fill, Levi May gathered her courage. "Sir, Boaz, I need to tell you something." She twisted her hands in her lap. I'm not the bride you were expecting. I know you're waiting for a proper Boston school teacher, someone refined and different from me. I'll understand if you want me to leave." Boaz was quiet for a long moment, his fork scraping thoughtfully against his plate. "Miss Benson," he said finally, his voice gentle as summer rain, "I prayed for a wife, not a picture." He met her startled gaze. "You're welcome to stay until you've got your strength back. No need to decide anything more right now." Tears pricked at Levi May's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay such kindness." "No repayment needed." He rose, clearing their plates. "I've got cattle to tend to, but you rest easy today." But Levi May couldn't rest. As soon as Boaz stepped out to the barn, she found his broom and began sweeping. The simple rhythm of the work soothed her nerves, and she took satisfaction in watching the dust and wood shavings disappear. When the floor was clean, she spotted a torn shirt draped over his chair. By the time afternoon sun slanted through the windows, she had the shirt mended with neat, tiny stitches. The cabin felt warmer somehow, more lived in, with the clean floors and fresh coffee brewing on the stove. Out on the snow-dusted range, Boaz rode his circuit among the cattle, his mind troubled. Taking in a strange woman, no matter how desperate her circumstances, could bring complications. What if someone came looking for her? What if her father returned? Yet every time he thought of sending her away, he remembered her courage in making that long journey north, following nothing but hope and rumors. The sun was setting when he returned, painting the snow-capped mountains in shades of pink and gold. The sight of smoke rising from his chimney stirred something in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but possibility. Inside, Levi May had soup warming on the stove. She'd changed into one of his old shirts, her torn dress hanging by the fire to dry. The shirt swallowed her, but somehow she looked more at ease. They ate their supper in comfortable silence until Levi May spoke softly. "I should tell you the whole truth of how I came to be here." Boaz set down his spoon, giving her his full attention. "Father was taking me to Denver, said he had prospects there." Her voice grew thick with memory. "We had train tickets. I'd saved for months working at the mercantile back home. But when we got to the station, he sold my ticket, laughed when I cried, said it served me right for being such a burden." She stared into her bowl. "Next morning, he was gone. Took every penny we had." The fire crackled in the hearth, burning lower as she spoke. Boaz's hands tightened on his cup, but he kept his anger from his voice. "That ain't no way to treat a daughter. I wandered Denver for days, sleeping in church porches when I could. Then I heard talk of a rancher up north looking for a wife." She glanced up at him. "I know I'm not what you wanted, but I promise to help however I can for as long as you'll let me stay." Boaz nodded, moved by her simple honesty. The woman before him had endured betrayal that would have broken many, yet here she sat, offering what help she could. He watched the firelight play across her features, seeing not the too large body she tried to hide, but the courage that had driven her to his door. "We'll take it one day at a time," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "That's all any of us can do." The next morning dawned clear and cold, with sunlight sparkling off fresh snow. Inside the cabin, Levi May stood at the rough wooden counter, flour dusting her hands as she kneaded dough. Her tongue poked out in concentration while she worked the sticky mass. "My mama always said bread making was a gift from the Lord," she explained to Boaz, who sat mending a bridle by the fire. "Though I reckon I never quite got her knack for it." Boaz glanced up, a small smile touching his weathered face. "Your mama sounds like a wise woman." She was. Levi's hand stilled for a moment. Left me her Bible when she passed. Got all her favorite verses marked with pressed flowers. The dough refused to cooperate. staying stubbornly dense under her fingers. Still, she persisted, humming hymns as she worked. When she finally shaped the heavy lump and set it to rise, pride warmed her chest despite her uncertainties. Hours later, she pulled the finished loaf from the oven, her face falling at the sight. It sat like a brown boulder on the cooking sheet, solid as the mountains outside. "Oh dear," she whispered, tapping it with a knuckle. The sound echoed like someone knocking on wood. A deep chuckle made her jump. Boaz had come in from the barn and stood watching, amusement crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I'm sorry," Levi stammered, her cheeks burning. "I wanted to help, but I've just wasted your flour." "Now don't fret." Boaz crossed to the counter and picked up the heavy loaf, weighing it in his broad palm. "Reckon this here's the most determined bread I've ever seen. Might make a fine doorstop, if nothing else." The gentle teasing in his voice, so different from the cruel mockery she was used to, startled a laugh from her. "Or a weapon, maybe? Could knock a man out cold with this. That's the spirit." His eyes crinkled deeper as he smiled. "Tomorrow's another day for trying." The next morning, Levi tried again. This time the bread came out slightly less brick-like, though still dense enough to resist cutting. But Boaz ate it anyway, insisting it wasn't half bad with plenty of butter. On the third morning, Levi was up early, determined to master the art of bread making. The sun had barely cleared the mountains when the sound of wagon wheels crunching through snow broke the dawn silence. Boaz stepped onto the porch, Levi hanging back nervously in the doorway. A smart buggy pulled up, and a slender woman in a fine green traveling dress descended, her movements precise and elegant. This, then, was Miss Havers, the real bride. "Mr. McGraw?" Her cultured Boston accent cut through the crisp mountain air. "I apologize for the delay. The weather made travel quite—" Her words trailed off as she caught sight of Levi in the doorway, still wearing one of Boaz's old shirts with flour on her hands. "Who is this?" Miss Havers demanded, her refined features pinching with displeasure. The cabin suddenly felt very small as they all stepped inside. Levi wrung her hands, painfully aware of how she must look next to Miss Havers' elegant appearance. "Miss Havers," Boaz began carefully, "this here's Miss Levi May Benson. She arrived a few nights back in need of shelter." "I see." Miss Havers' tone could have frozen water. "And you simply took in this substantial young woman?" "Alone. Unchaperoned. It ain't like that," Boaz said firmly. "She was in trouble and needed help." Levi stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. "Please, Mom, let me explain. My father abandoned me in Denver, and I had nowhere else to go. Mr. McGraw has been nothing but honorable, giving me a safe place to stay until I can make other arrangements." "Honorable?" Miss Havers' laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You expect me to believe that? A man living alone with an unmarried girl, and such a girl at that?" Her eyes raked over Levi's large frame with undisguised contempt. "This is completely improper. You've made a fool of me, Mr. McGraw, carrying on with this fat girl while I traveled all this way to be your wife." "Now see here," Boaz started, his voice hardening, but Miss Havers was already turning away. "Don't bother explaining. The whole town will hear about this scandal, I assure you." She stalked to the door, her skirts swishing with angry emphasis. "To think I nearly married a man of such low character. Good day to you both." The door slammed behind her. The buggy wheels crunched away through the snow, leaving a terrible silence in their wake. Levi stood frozen for a moment, then crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. "Oh Lord, what have I done?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she sank onto a chair. "I've ruined everything for you. The whole town will think the worst now, and it's all my fault." "Hey now." Boaz knelt beside her chair, his big hands gentle as he offered her his handkerchief. "You ain't done nothing wrong, you hear me?" "Nothing at all. But your reputation ain't worth as much as doing right by someone in need." His voice was firm. "Let them talk. Truth stands longer than gossip." Still, the evening meal was quiet, both of them pushing stew around their bowls, minds heavy with worry about what the coming days would bring. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows on the walls, while outside the wind whispered of change coming to their small mountain sanctuary. Levi broke the silence first. "I should go before things get worse." "You'll do no such thing," Boaz said quietly. "Winter's setting in proper now. You got nowhere else to go, and I won't send you out to freeze." He met her tearful gaze steadily. "We'll weather this storm together, Miss Benson. That's a promise." The days crept forward like molasses in winter. By week's end, the storm Miss Havers promised broke over their heads, not in snow and ice, but in whispers sharp as needles. Boaz noticed it first at Mason's general store. He'd gone in for supplies, his boots leaving wet prints on the wooden floor. The usual friendly greetings died when he entered. Two women huddled near the fabric bolts, their heads bent close together. Their words carried clear across the quiet store. "Living in sin, plain as day." One whispered, not bothering to lower her voice much. "That poor Boston lady told everybody how it is." "And her so young," the other added. "Him keeping her up there like that. It ain't decent." Boaz's hands tightened on the sugar sack he'd been reaching for. The store owner, Tom Mason, suddenly found his ledger fascinating, avoiding Boaz's eyes as he rang up the purchases. That same afternoon, Levi ventured into town alone, clutching Boaz's money for flour and yeast. She'd insisted on going, determined to keep trying with her bread-making despite the rocky start. But the welcome she found was colder than the mountain wind. Mrs. Peterson, who ran the dry goods counter, turned her back when Levi approached. "We're out of flour," she said flatly, though Levi could see the barrels stacked behind her. "Please, Mum," Levi tried. "I only need out office flour." Each word fell like an icicle. Levi retreated, her cheeks burning. As she hurried down the street, she heard snickers and whispers following her like shadows. "Did you see the size of her? No wonder she had to trap a man. Shameless creature." The sun was setting when she finally trudged back to the cabin, empty-handed and heavy-hearted. She was almost to the door when high-pitched laughter made her freeze. A group of children had gathered at the edge of the yard. As Levi watched, one boy stuffed a pillow under his shirt and waddled forward, swaying his hips dramatically. "Look at me," he called in a squeaky falsetto. "I'm the giant's woman. Watch how I walk." The other children howled with laughter. Another boy joined in, pretending to stagger under the first one's weight. "Help! She's gonna squash me." Levi stood rooted, each giggle cutting deeper than the last. Tears blurred her vision, but she couldn't seem to move. Suddenly, the cabin door banged open. Boaz emerged like a storm cloud, his face thunderous. "What's all this racket?" The children scattered like quail, their mocking laughter fading into the dusk. Boaz strode forward, his long legs eating up the distance, but they were already disappearing into the trees. "Get on home," he bellowed after them. "And don't let me catch you back here." When he turned back, the anger drained from his face at the sight of Levi's tears. "Oh, Miss Benson." "They're right to mock me," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "I must be cursed somehow. Everywhere I go, nobody wants me, even my own father." Her voice broke. Boaz was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his deep voice was gentle as summer rain. "You know what the good book says. 1 Samuel, chapter 16, verse 7. Man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart." Levi blinked up at him, tears still clinging to her lashes. "And I reckon," he continued softly, "that your heart's worth more than all their bitter talk put together." Something warm unfurled in Levi's chest, like a flower reaching for sunlight. She held those words close, letting them sink deep where shame had made its home. Though the ache didn't vanish completely, it eased enough for her to straighten her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, squaring her chin, Would you like supper? I can make beans and bread, and I found some apple preserves in the cellar." "That sounds right fine." While she cooked, Boaz sat in his usual chair, mending tack by the fire. The familiar domestic sounds, the bubble of beans, the scrape of the spoon, the crackle of flames, wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Neither mentioned the children's cruel game or the town's cold shoulders. But as they ate their simple meal, Boaz studied Levi's downturned face in the lamplight. She'd made herself small in her chair, as if trying to take up less space in the world. Something in his chest tightened at the sight. The next morning, Boaz saddled 2 horses before dawn. When Levi emerged from the cabin, he was waiting. "We're riding to town," he announced. "Together. But—" Levi hesitated. "After yesterday, you need flour for baking," he said firmly. "And I need supplies. Ain't no sense in letting wagging tongues keep us from necessary things." He helped her mount, his hand steady and respectful. Then he swung into his own saddle, sitting tall and straight as a pine tree. As they started down the trail, Levi clutched her reins nervously. "What if they—" she began. "You're under my roof," Boaz cut in, his voice carrying clear in the morning air. "And I'll not be ashamed of doing right by someone in need. Let them talk if they want. We'll hold our heads high." Levi glanced at him, this giant of a man who quoted scripture and defended her against children's taunts, who looked past her size to see her heart. Something settled in her chest, warm and sure as summer sunshine. Together they rode toward town, their horses' hooves marking steady time in the snow. Whatever waited ahead, they would face it side by side. The ride back from town left Boaz and Levi bone-weary, not from physical strain, but from the weight of hostile stares. They'd managed to get their supplies, but every transaction had been colored by cold shoulders and whispered comments just loud enough to hear. Levi clutched her hard-won sack of flour close as they approached the cabin. Dark clouds rolled in over the mountains, heavy with the promise of snow. The wind had picked up, carrying an icy bite that made their horses snort and toss their heads. "Storm's coming," Boaz observed, studying the sky. "Reckon we'd best prepare." They worked quickly to unload their supplies. Boaz's movements were efficient, born from years of mountain winters, while Levi followed his lead. The first fat snowflakes began to fall as they finished. "Woodpile's running low," he said, shouldering his axe. "Need enough to keep warm if this turns bad?" Levi grabbed a second axe without hesitation. At Boaz's questioning look, she managed a small smile. "Papa may not have wanted me, but he taught me to swing an axe all the same." Together they worked at the chopping block, their breath clouding in the cooling air. Levi's strokes weren't as powerful as Boaz's, but they were steady and true. When she began to tire, she switched to stacking the split logs against the cabin wall. The snow fell harder as they moved to secure the livestock. Boaz showed her how to reinforce the corral gate with rope, their fingers numbing despite their gloves. In the barn, they laid extra hay for the horses and cattle, working in comfortable silence broken only by the occasional rumble of thunder. By the time they made it back inside, darkness had settled early under the storm clouds. Levi built up the fire while Boaz hung their snow-dampened coats. The familiar tasks felt different somehow, more intimate, after working side by side against the weather. As Levi warmed soup from the morning, she kept glancing at her travel bag in the corner. Finally, gathering her courage, she crossed the room and pulled out a worn leather Bible. "This was Mama's," she said softly, running her fingers over the cracked spine. She left it behind when she passed, all marked up with her thoughts in the margins. I carried it with me from Denver." Boaz looked up from where he sat, removing his boots. "Would you read some?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Been a while since I heard the good book read proper." Levi settled in her chair, opening to a marked page. The firelight caught the faded ink of her mother's handwriting as she began to read. Her voice stumbled over some of the longer words, but the warmth of it filled the cabin better than any fire. After a few verses, she noticed Boaz's furrowed brow. He stared into the flames, his big hands clasped tight. "Something wrong?" she asked. He was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough. Never learned my letters proper, can read some simple words but scripture. He shook his head. Always been shame of mine. Levi closed the Bible carefully. I could teach you, she offered, if you'd like. Boaz looked at her then, hope warring with doubt in his expression. You wouldn't mind? I'd be honored, she said firmly. We could start tomorrow morning, before chores. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features. I'd like that fine. True to her word, Levi rose before dawn the next day. She had the lamp lit and her coffee brewing when Boaz emerged from his small bedroom. They sat at the table, shoulders nearly touching in the lantern's golden circle. Levi started with simple words, writing them clear on a piece of paper. Boaz's huge hands looked strange, holding the pencil, but his determination showed in every careful stroke as he copied the letters. Cat, he sounded out slowly. Hat, rat. That's right, Levi beamed. You're doing wonderfully. When he struggled with a word, frustration tightening his jaw, she touched his arm gently. My mama always said learning was like building a fence, one post at a time, nice and steady. That made him chuckle, easing the tension. Soon they were both laughing as he mixed up similar letters, Levi's patient corrections peppered with stories of her own learning struggles. The lessons became part of their daily rhythm, as natural as feeding livestock or cooking meals. Each morning they bent their heads together over paper and pencil, Boaz's confidence growing with every small victory. One night, about a week into their lessons, a howl split the darkness. Boaz was on his feet instantly, grabbing his shotgun from its place by the door. More howls answered the first, wolves and close to the corral. Before he could move, Levi snatched up the second shotgun from its peg. At his startled look, she checked the load with practiced hands. I can shoot too, she said simply. Papa taught me that much at least. Together they stepped out into the snowy night. The moon cast enough light to see dark shapes moving at the edge of the corral, where the cattle huddled nervous and stamping. Boaz and Levi stood shoulder to shoulder, their weapons ready. A wolf slunk closer, eyes gleaming in the moonlight. Boaz fired a warning shot into the air. The sound cracked across the snow-hushed landscape. Most of the pack melted back into the shadows, but one bold wolf crept forward still. Levi's shot kicked up snow right in front of it, sending it yelping back into the darkness. They waited, breath frosting in the cold air, until the only sounds were the settling cattle and the wind in the pines. Good shooting, Boaz said quietly as they headed back inside. Levi ducked her head, pleased. Reckon we make a fair team. Reckon we do at that, he agreed, and something in his voice made her cheeks warm despite the cold. They stayed up a while longer, too alert for sleep. Levi made tea while Boaz built up the fire. When she handed him his cup, their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away too quickly. The wolves' howls grew distant and finally faded altogether. But something else had grown stronger, a connection forged through shared work, patient teaching, and standing together against danger. Neither spoke of it directly, but it hung in the air between them, warm as the firelight and just as vital. The crisp morning air carried the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Boaz paused in his wood-splitting, axe held mid-swing as a well-groomed bay horse appeared on the trail. The rider's black coat and stern expression identified him immediately, Deacon Crenshaw from the town church. Boaz set his axe aside and wiped his palms on his trousers. Inside the cabin, he could hear Levi humming as she kneaded bread dough. The peaceful sound made the deacon's rigid posture seem even more unwelcome. Morning, Deacon, Boaz said evenly as the older man dismounted. Crenshaw barely nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line. We need to speak, McGraw. Inside. Boaz's jaw tightened, but he led the way into the cabin. Levi looked up from her work, flour dusting her arms. Her smile faltered at the sight of their visitor. Miss Benson, Crenshaw said coldly. I might have known I'd find you here still. Sir. Levi murmured, quickly wiping her hands on her apron. Would you care for coffee? I'll not take refreshment in a house of sin, the deacon declared, though he sat stiffly at the table. His disapproving gaze swept the cabin's humble interior. I've come on behalf of the church council. Boaz remained standing, his large frame positioned protectively near Levi. Speak your piece, then. This situation cannot continue, Crenshaw said. An unmarried woman living under your roof. It's causing talk. Worse, it's becoming a stumbling block to our young people. How so? Boaz's voice was quiet but carried an edge. The deacon's fingers drummed the table. The girls whisper about her presence here. The boys make crude jokes. Parents are concerned their children will think such arrangements are acceptable. Levi's face had gone pale. She pressed her hands against the rough wood of the counter behind her, as if seeking support. Miss Benson. Crenshaw turned his attention to her directly. You must see how your continued presence here damages the moral fabric of our community. If you have any Christian conscience at all, you'll remove yourself. She's done nothing wrong. Boaz's deep voice filled the cabin. Nothing. Living alone with a man, accepting his charity, it has the appearance of evil. Crenshaw insisted. And appearance matters, McGraw. You were respected once. Now people wonder if you've lost your moral compass entirely. My moral compass points true enough. Boaz stepped closer to the table, his shadow falling across the deacon. It tells me to shelter those in need, to show kindness to the wounded. Where does your compass point, deacon? To gossip and judgment? Color rose in Crenshaw's face. How dare you question my... I dare plenty! Boaz cut him off. You sit there speaking of moral fabric while trying to cast out an innocent girl into winter with nowhere to go. Which of us has truly lost his way? The deacon stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I've delivered the council's warning. What you do with it is on your own head. He strode to the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. But remember, pride goes before destruction, McGraw, and a haughty spirit before a fall. The door slammed behind him. They heard his horse's hooves fade into distance before either spoke. When Levi's tears finally came, they were silent, tracking down her cheeks to drip onto her flower-covered apron. He's right, she whispered. I'm ruining everything for you. Your standing in the community, your reputation. Stop. Boaz crossed to her in 2 long strides. Look at me, Levi May. She raised her tear-stained face. These past weeks with you here, teaching me my letters, sharing meals, working side by side, they've brought me more joy than all my years of respected loneliness. His voice roughened with emotion. I won't let them shame you away. But the town can mind its own business, he said firmly. God knows the truth of things. That's enough for me. Levi drew a shaky breath, steadied by his certainty. For me too, she said softly. That evening, they sat close together at the table, lamp burning low as they bent over Levi's mother's Bible. Boaz traced each word with his finger, sounding them out carefully. And you were... He paused, frowning at the next word. Redeemed, Levi supplied gently. Redeemed, he repeated. Not with corruptible things, as silver and gold, but with precious blood. That's us, Levi whispered, her eyes bright in the lamplight. Redeemed. Boaz's hand found hers on the table, engulfing it in his warm grip. They sat there together as the fire crackled in the hearth, 2 hearts changing, growing stronger in their shared faith despite the world's condemnation. The lamplight cast their shadows on the cabin wall, no longer separate and lonely, but intertwined, supporting each other as they faced whatever tomorrow might bring. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside there was warmth, understanding, and the quiet certainty that they had found something worth defending. The January wind whipped across the mountain slopes, piling snow into deep drifts around Boaz's cabin. Inside, Levi pressed her face against the frozen window pane, watching the white landscape sparkle in the morning sun. Her breath made little clouds on the glass as she traced patterns with her fingertip. "I want to learn to ride," she announced suddenly, turning to where Boaz sat mending a bridle at the table. He looked up, surprise crossing his weathered features. "You ain't never ridden before?" "Papa said I was too heavy for horses." Levi's voice caught slightly, but she lifted her chin. "But I reckon that was just another of his cruel tales." Boaz set down his work, studying her determined expression. "Old Sally could carry me and 2 full grain sacks without complaint. She'll do fine for learning." Hope brightened Levi's face. "Really? You'll teach me? Get your coat," he said, already reaching for his own. In the barn, Sally nickered softly as they approached. The elderly mare's brown coat was thick with winter fur, her eyes gentle as Levi offered her a handful of oats. Boaz demonstrated how to check the saddle's cinch and position the stirrups. "Now," he said, "grab the horn and put your foot here." His large hands hovered near her waist, ready to assist. Levi gathered her skirts and attempted to hoist herself up. Her first try ended with her sliding back down, cheeks flushed. The second attempt got her foot caught in the stirrup. On the third try, she managed to get halfway up before tumbling backward into a snowdrift. For a moment, she lay there staring at the bright sky. Then laughter bubbled up from deep in her chest, spilling out in great gasping peals. Tears streamed down her face as she howled with mirth, the sound echoing off the barn walls. Even Sally seemed to be watching with amusement. Boaz's deep chuckle joined hers as he reached down to help her up. His hands were gentle despite their size, brushing snow from her coat and hair. "You all right?" "I'm wonderful," Levi wheezed, still giggling. "Did you see me? Like a sack of potatoes falling off a wagon." Her joy was infectious. Boaz's whole face softened as he smiled down at her. "Want to try again?" "Yes, please." She squared her shoulders, determination replacing mirth. This time, with Boaz's steady hands supporting her, she managed to settle into the saddle. Pride straightened her spine as she gathered the reins the way he showed her. They spent the next hour walking careful circles in the packed snow of the barnyard, Boaz leading Sally while Levi learned to move with the horse's gait. Later that afternoon, Levi swept the cabin floor, humming quietly at first. The tune grew stronger until she was singing in full voice. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." Her clear soprano filled every corner of the cabin, rising and falling with emotion. Boaz stood frozen in the doorway where he'd been about to enter, transfixed by the beauty of her voice. The broom moved in rhythm as she continued. "Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." When the last note faded, Boaz finally stepped inside. That was something special. Levi startled, not having noticed him. "Oh, I didn't mean to make such a racket." "No racket," he said firmly. "Pure glory is what that was, like angels singing." Her cheeks colored at the praise, but pleasure shone in her eyes. "Mama taught me all the old hymns. Sometimes singing them makes me feel closer to her." That evening, they sat at their usual places for reading practice. Boaz opened Levi's mother's Bible carefully, turning to a marked passage. His finger moved steadily across the words as he read, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures, he leadeth me beside the still waters, he restoreth my soul." For the first time, he made it through the entire psalm without stumbling once. When he finished, Levi burst into applause, beaming with pride. "Perfect! Oh, Boaz, that was perfect!" His own smile was quieter, but just as pleased. "Had me a good teacher." The days fell into a peaceful rhythm. They shared meals and chores, reading lessons and quiet evenings. Levi's voice often filled the cabin with hymns while she worked, and Boaz found himself humming along. Sometimes they would sit together watching the sunset paint the snow-covered peaks in rose and gold, comfortable in their shared silence. When Sunday came, they dressed in their best clothes and rode into town. Levi sat proudly on Sally now, having mastered staying in the saddle. But at the church steps, Deacon Crenshaw stood with crossed arms, blocking their path. "This is a house of God," he declared, "not a place for—" His lip curled. "Your kind of situation." Levi's face fell, but Boaz touched her arm gently. "Come on," he said. "We'll have our own service." They found a spot on a sunny hillside overlooking the valley. Levi spread her shawl on a fallen log for them to sit. The winter air was crisp and clear, the sky a deep blue arch overhead. Birds called in the bare branches around them. "The Lord is in his holy temple," Boaz quoted softly. "Let all the earth keep silence before him." Levi's voice rose sweet and pure in their opening hymn. Together they read from her mother's Bible, taking turns with the verses. Their prayers lifted on the mountain wind, honest and unadorned. When they finished, both felt the peace that comes from true worship. Walking back through town, they passed clusters of churchgoers leaving the proper service. Disapproving glares followed them, along with whispered comments behind raised hands. But Levi walked tall beside Boaz, her gloved hand tucked into his arm. When someone pointedly crossed the street to avoid them, Boaz simply squeezed her hand in solidarity. "Thank you," Levi said quietly as they reached their horses. "For what?" "For making me feel like I belong somewhere, even when others say I don't." Boaz's expression was tender as he helped her mount. "You do belong," he said simply. "Right here." They rode home together through the sparkling winter afternoon, two souls joined by faith and friendship, finding family in each other despite the world's judgment. The sun caught Levi's smile as she cantered ahead, no longer the clumsy beginner of that morning fall in the snow. Boaz watched her go, his heart full of quiet joy. The first whispers of spring teased the mountain air, patches of ground emerged from melting snow, and morning bird song grew more insistent. Boaz watched Levi at the cabin window one dawn, her face bright as she spotted the season's first robin. "Reckon it's time you learned to fish," he said over breakfast. "River's running clear now." Levi's eyes widened. "Fish? Me? Ain't hard once you know the way." He gathered his fishing gear while she packed a basket with bread, cheese, and early spring apples. The morning sun warmed their backs as they walked the winding path to the river. At the water's edge, willows dipped their branches in the current. Boaz showed Levi how to thread a worm onto the hook, his large hands gentle as he guided hers. "Like this." She held up the baited line. "Perfect. Now watch." He demonstrated the cast, line arcing gracefully over the water. "Let it drift natural-like. Fish don't trust anything moving too fast." Levi's first attempt sent the line into nearby bushes. She untangled it patiently, trying again and again until finally the hook landed with a soft plop in the current. "There you have it." Boaz settled beside her on a sun-warmed rock. "Now comes the waiting part." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow past. A pair of deer picked their way down to drink upstream. The morning stretched peaceful and golden. Suddenly, Levi's line went taut. Oh, I've got something." "Easy now," Boaz coached. "Let him tire himself some before you reel." Levi leaned forward, concentrating fiercely. The fish fought hard, pulling her closer to the edge. As she reached to adjust her grip, her foot slipped on the mossy rock. With a yelp, she pitched toward the water. Boaz's hand shot out, catching her around the waist. "Whoa there!" They froze for a moment, both laughing, before he helped her regain her balance. The fish had escaped, but Levi didn't seem to mind. "Land's safer than water for me." She giggled, brushing off her skirts. "You did fine." Boaz smiled. "Better than my first try, ended up soaked head to toe." They spread their picnic in a patch of spring grass. Levi broke the bread into shares while Boaz poured coffee from his battered tin pot. The simple meal tasted like a feast in the fresh air. "The Wilsons' place is just over that rise," Boaz said as they packed up. "Might be nice to pay a visit if you're willing." Levi hesitated. After months of cold shoulders in town, meeting new people made her nervous. But Boaz's steady presence gave her courage. "I'd like that," she said softly. The Wilson ranch sat neat and welcoming, smoke curling from its chimney. Martha Wilson opened the door at their knock, her round face creasing in a smile. "Boaz McGraw, been too long since you stopped by." Her kind eyes turned to Levi. "And this must be the young lady we've heard about. Come in, come in. I've just pulled a berry pie from the oven." Inside, the cabin was warm and homey. Ezekiel Wilson looked up from his paper, nodding welcome. "Pull up a chair, folks. Martha's pie is worth the trip." They gathered around the scrubbed wooden table. Martha served generous slices while asking Levi about herself. There was no judgment in her questions, only genuine interest. "Must get lonely up there sometimes," Martha said, pouring more coffee. "You're welcome here anytime, dear. We've raised 6 children of our own. House feels too quiet now without young folks around." Levi blinked back tears at the simple kindness. "Thank you. That means more than I can say." The afternoon passed in easy conversation. When they finally rose to leave, Martha pressed a jar of preserves into Levi's hands. Ezekiel clapped Boaz on the shoulder with a knowing look. "Good to see you both," he said. "Don't be strangers now." The sun was setting as they walked home, painting the snow-touched peaks in rose and gold. Levi clutched the preserve jar like a treasure. "They're so kind," she whispered. "I'd almost forgotten people could be like that." Inside the cabin, she set about making supper while Boaz built up the fire. The familiar routine felt different somehow, touched by the day's warmth. As they finished the meal, Levi grew thoughtful. "You know what I dreamed about all those nights alone in Denver?" She traced patterns on the wooden table. "Just this. A home. Somewhere to belong. Someone to belong to." Her voice caught. "I never thought—" "Levi." Boaz's deep voice was tender. He moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her work-roughened hands in his. "You belong here. With me. I love you." She stared at him, heart pounding. You do?" "More than I know how to say proper." His eyes held hers steadily. "Not from pity neither. Because you're brave and kind and strong. Because you fill this cabin with song and make me want to be a better man. Because loving you feels like coming home." Tears spilled down Levi's cheeks. "But I'm not what most men want." "You're everything I need." Boaz squeezed her hands gently. "Levi May Benson, will you marry me? Make this home ours, true and proper?" "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes!" Joy broke through her tears like sunlight. "Oh, Boaz, yes!" He gathered her close, both of them laughing and crying at once. The firelight danced across their faces as they held each other, marveling at the miracle of love found in unexpected places. "Thank you, Lord," Levi murmured against his shoulder, "for leading me here, for giving me him." Boaz's arms tightened around her. "For giving us each other," he amended softly. They stayed by the hearth long into the evening, planning their future, sharing dreams, hearts overflowing with gratitude for the gift they'd found in each other. News traveled faster than spring floods in mountain country. By sunup the next morning, word of Boaz McGraw's intention to marry Levi May Benson had reached every breakfast table in town. Whispers buzzed like angry bees through the general store, post office, and feed mill. "Did you hear?" Mrs. Peterson clutched her shawl tight, speaking in hushed tones outside the mercantile. "That McGraw means to make that girl his wife. It ain't right." Another woman chimed in. "Living together all winter, and now this." Inside Hendricks Dry Goods, Levi stood at the fabric counter, fingers trembling as she touched the rolls of muslin. She'd saved carefully from the egg money Boaz insisted she keep, determined to make a proper wedding dress. The shop grew quiet as she entered, conversations dropping to murmurs. Mr. Hendricks approached slowly. "Can I help you, Miss Benson?" "Yes, sir." Levi lifted her chin. "I need 6 yards of the white muslin, please, and thread to match." His scissors hesitated over the fabric. "You sure about this? Folks are talking." "Let them talk." Levi's voice was steady, though her heart raced. "I'm to be married." The bell above the door chimed as Deacon Crenshaw entered. His severe gaze fell on Levi, disapproval radiating from every line of his face. "Marriage is a sacred institution, Miss Benson. Not to be entered into lightly or to cover sin." Levi's cheeks burned, but she met his eyes. "There's no sin to cover, Deacon. Only love and God's blessing." "You mock the church with such claims." Crenshaw's words cut sharp as winter wind. "That cabin's been a house of impropriety since you arrived. Now you seek to legitimize your situation." "That's enough." Boaz's deep voice filled the doorway. He crossed to stand beside Levi, one large hand settling protective on her shoulder. "The muslin, Mr. Hendricks, if you please." The shopkeeper hurried to measure and cut the fabric, eager to end the tension. Crenshaw watched them pay and leave, his lips pressed thin with righteous anger. That afternoon, Levi spread the muslin across their table. Boaz helped her measure and mark the pieces, his big hands surprisingly careful with the delicate chalk. When she started to cut, her hands shook. "Here now," Boaz said gently. "Let me help." He steadied the fabric while she worked the scissors, the soft snick of blade through cloth filling the quiet cabin. "Will you truly want me?" Levi whispered, pausing in her cutting. "With all this fuss and bother?" Boaz turned her to face him. "I want you more with every passing day. Ain't nothing they can say to change that." The next morning, Crenshaw's sermon thundered through the little church. "Marriage is ordained by God, not meant to cloak wickedness. Those who mock this sacred bond mock the Almighty himself." Though the doors were closed to them, Boaz and Levi could hear every word from where they sat on a nearby hill. Levi's fingers worked steadily at her sewing as the preacher's condemnation rolled over them. "We'll still marry in that church," Boaz said firmly. "It's God's house before it's theirs." Levi nodded, stitching love into every seam of her simple gown. The dress took shape slowly. Modest, clean-lined, beautiful in its simplicity. Like their love, it was unadorned but true. They walked into town together that evening, heading to the Wilsons to discuss wedding plans. Levi wore her best calico dress, Boaz his Sunday coat. Whispers followed them down the dusty street. Shameless, just shameless. Poor Boaz, surely bewitched. That girl thinking she can just... But Boaz and Levi walked tall, hands clasped tight between them. Their boots kicked up little clouds of dust, marking their steady progress past the staring faces and pointing fingers. "Reckon we're quite the spectacle," Levi said softly. Boaz squeezed her hand. "Let them look. We've nothing to hide." They passed the church where Crenshaw stood on the steps, watching their approach. Boaz tipped his hat, courteous but unflinching. Levi's spine straightened as they drew even with the deacon. "Evening, Deacon Crenshaw," she said clearly. "Fine sunset the Lord's given us." The deacon's face darkened, but they walked on before he could respond. Their shadows stretched long behind them in the golden light, two figures moving forward together, step by determined step. "I love you," Boaz said simply as they reached the end of the street. "That's all that matters." Levi's answering smile outshone the setting sun. They continued on toward the Wilsons' ranch, leaving the gossip and judgment behind in the gathering dusk. Their path was clear, their hearts were sure, and not even the whole town's disapproval could shake their certainty in each other. Dawn broke crystal clear on the wedding morning, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of rose and gold. Inside Boaz McGraw's cabin, Levi May stood before the small mirror, adjusting the simple veil she had fashioned from spare muslin. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the white dress she had sewn with such care. "You look like an angel," Martha Wilson said softly, pinning a sprig of dried flowers to Levi's bodice. The neighbor woman had arrived early to help, one of the few townspeople who had shown them kindness. Outside, the February morning sparkled. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, turning the world clean and new. Levi pressed her hand to the window glass, feeling the cold seep through. "Do you reckon it's a sign?" she whispered. "All this white, like God's blessing?" Martha squeezed her shoulder. "The Lord sees your heart, child. That's all that matters." The cabin door opened, bringing a swirl of crisp air. Boaz stepped in, wearing his best black suit and polished boots. He stopped short at the sight of Levi, his eyes going soft with wonder. "Well now," he said quietly, "ain't you the prettiest thing these old eyes have ever seen?" Levi blushed, ducking her head. "You clean up mighty fine yourself, Boaz McGraw." They set out for town in the Wilsons' wagon, Martha and her husband Tom up front, Boaz and Levi in back. The morning sun caught the snow crystals, making them sparkle like scattered diamonds. Levi huddled close to Boaz, clutching her mother's worn Bible. "You nervous?" Boaz asked softly. "A little," she admitted, "but happy too. So happy I can hardly breathe with it." As they approached the white clapboard church, Levi's happiness faltered. A crowd had gathered on the steps, faces set in hard lines. Deacon Crenshaw stood at the top, black coat stark against the snow, arms crossed over his chest. The wagon rolled to a stop. Boaz helped Levi down, tucking her hand into his elbow. Together they walked toward the church, their boots crunching in the fresh snow. The crowd parted slightly, revealing the heavy wooden doors, barred shut with a length of rough timber. "What's the meaning of this?" Boaz's deep voice carried across the sudden silence. Deacon Crenshaw lifted his chin. "This house of God will not be party to mockery. No sacred vows will be spoken here today." "Mockery?" Boaz took a step forward. "There's no mockery in honest love." "Honest?" Someone in the crowd scoffed. "Living in sin all winter, now wanting God's blessing?" Levi felt the stares like physical blows. Her white dress suddenly seemed a foolish dream. She saw Miss Havers in the crowd, the Boston bride who should have been standing here instead, smirking behind her gloved hand. "Please," Levi's voice shook. "We only want to be married proper, before God and witnesses." "God sees what you are," Crenshaw declared. "A temptress who led a good man astray. This church will not sanctify such a union." The crowd murmured agreement. Levi saw judgment in every face, contempt in every eye. The sound of snickering children cut through her like knives. "Now you listen here." Boaz's voice boomed out, echoing off the church walls. "God's love is bigger than your walls, bigger than your small minds and hard hearts. His mercy dash." But Levi couldn't bear it anymore. Shame and humiliation crashed over her like a wave. Dropping Boaz's arm, she gathered her skirts and fled. "Levi!" Boaz called after her. "Levi May, wait!" She ran blindly, tears freezing on her cheeks. The morning's perfect snow was falling again, thick flakes swirling around her. Behind her, she heard voices raised in argument, Boaz's deep tones thundering against Crenshaw's righteous anger. But Levi ran on, her white dress a pale ghost in the strengthening storm. She passed the general store, the livery stable, the edge of town. Still she ran, though her lungs burned and her feet grew numb. The snow fell harder, until she could barely see the path ahead. "Lord," she sobbed as she ran, "why must love hurt so much?" The storm closed around her like a white curtain, erasing her tracks almost as soon as they formed. Levi's figure grew smaller and smaller, until finally she vanished completely into the swirling snow. Back at the church steps, Boaz's desperate voice called her name, but only the wind answered, howling across the empty street like a mourning thing. Boaz stumbled through the churning snow towards the stables, his heart pounding like thunder. The world had become a white wall of stinging ice, but he wouldn't let that stop him. Not with Levi out there somewhere, alone in her thin wedding dress. "Hold on, girl," he whispered, fumbling with frozen fingers to saddle Thunder, his strongest horse. "Just hold on." The big black stallion stamped nervously as Boaz worked, the storm's fury making him skittish. But years of trust between man and beast won out. Within minutes, they plunged into the tempest. Boaz's body bent low over Thunder's neck as they fought through wind-driven snow. "Lord above," Boaz prayed, his voice raw. "Guide me to her. Don't let me be too late." The valley stretched vast before them, its familiar landmarks erased by the blizzard. Boaz relied on instinct, letting Thunder pick his way through drifts while scanning desperately for any sign of white muslin against the endless white landscape. Every second that passed was another moment Levi spent freezing. 1 hour bled into 2. Thunder's sides heaved with effort as they searched, but Boaz urged him on. His own hands had gone numb on the reins, his face raw from the cutting wind. Still, he pressed forward, calling Levi's name until his voice grew hoarse. "Levi May." The wind snatched his words away. "Where are you, girl?" Near the 3rd hour, Thunder's ears pricked forward. The horse lifted his head, nostrils flaring. Boaz felt him shift direction slightly, moving with purpose now instead of their desperate wandering. "What is it, boy? You smell something?" Thunder picked up his pace, fighting through a particularly deep drift. And there, just visible through the curtain of snow, Boaz spotted something dark against the white. His heart leaped into his throat. "Levi!" he roared, spurring Thunder forward. She lay crumpled near the river's edge, her wedding dress spread around her like broken wings. Her skin had taken on a frightening bluish tinge, her lips nearly purple with cold. For one terrible moment, Boaz feared he truly was too late. Then he saw the faintest rise and fall of her chest. "Thank you, Lord," he breathed, practically falling from the saddle in his haste to reach her. "Thank you." Boaz gathered Levi into his arms, her body terrifyingly cold against his chest. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Working quickly, he shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her before lifting her onto Thunder's back. "Stay with me, sweetheart," he murmured, swinging up behind her. "Just stay with me." The ride home was a blur of desperate prayer and pounding hooves. Boaz held Levi close with one arm while guiding Thunder with the other, his voice a constant stream of pleading. "Lord, spare her. Please, Lord, don't take her from me. I'll do anything, just let her live. Please, God, please." With each thundering stride, Boaz's prayers grew more fervent. Thunder seemed to understand the urgency, finding strength to run despite his exhaustion. The blizzard raged around them, but Boaz barely noticed the cold anymore. His entire world had narrowed to the limp form in his arms and the distance left to cover. Finally, blessedly, the cabin's shape emerged from the white void. Boaz didn't even wait for Thunder to fully stop before sliding down with Levi, running for the door with her cradled against him. Inside, the banked fire still smoldered. Boaz laid Levi as close to the hearth as he dared, his hands shaking as he built up the flames. The wedding dress was soaked through with snow, clinging to her like a shroud. "Got to get you warm," he muttered, grabbing every blanket in the cabin. "Got to get your blood moving again." He wrapped her in layer after layer, rubbing her arms and legs through the blankets to generate heat. Her skin remained frighteningly cold to the touch, her breathing shallow and irregular. "Come on, Levi May," he pleaded, gathering her close to share his own warmth. "Fight for me, girl. Don't you give up." Minutes crawled past like hours. Boaz kept up his desperate ministrations, alternating between murmured encouragement to Levi and broken prayers to God. Tears froze on his cheeks as he worked, his voice growing increasingly hoarse. "I love you," he whispered against her temple. "I love you something fierce, Levi May Benson. Don't you leave me alone again. Please." The fire crackled and popped, slowly filling the cabin with blessed heat. Boaz held Levi closer, willing his own warmth into her still form. He'd never felt so helpless in his life, not even during those long, lonely years before she came. "Remember that first night?" he said softly, needing to fill the silence. "You showed up at my door like an answer to prayer. You still are, sweetheart. You're still my answer. So you got to wake up now, you hear?" As if in response to his words, Levi's eyelids fluttered. Boaz held his breath, hardly daring to hope. Then slowly, so slowly it nearly stopped his heart, her eyes opened just a crack. "Boaz?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but to him it sounded like angels singing. "I'm here," he choked out, voice breaking. "I'm right here, sweetheart." Her eyes drifted closed again, but her hand weakly gripped his through the blankets. Boaz pressed his forehead to hers, overcome with gratitude and relief. "Thank you, Lord," he breathed. "Thank you." Outside, the blizzard continued to rage, but inside the cabin, wrapped in blankets and each other, Boaz and Levi held on. For 3 days, Levi drifted between sleep and waking, her body fighting to recover from the bitter cold. Boaz barely left her side, keeping the fire blazing and watching every shallow breath with worried eyes. He'd moved his mother's rocking chair next to the bed, its familiar creak marking the hours as he maintained his vigil. "Just a little more," he coaxed, supporting Levi's head as he brought a spoonful of chicken broth to her pale lips. Her hands trembled too much to hold the bowl herself, but she managed small sips, each one a victory. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and healing herbs, borrowed from Mrs. Wilson, who'd braved the storm to bring medicines. Boaz had been grateful for the neighbor woman's kindness, one of the few bright spots in these dark days. When Levi's fever finally broke on the second night, Boaz wept with relief. He'd been reading aloud from her mother's Bible, his finger tracing each word carefully as he'd learned to do during their lessons. The marked passages brought comfort to them both. "Love bears all things," he read slowly, his deep voice gentle in the lamplight. "Believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." Levi stirred, her eyes focusing on him with more clarity than they had since the storm. "You saved me," she whispered. Boaz set the Bible aside, leaning forward to take her hand. "Couldn't do anything else. You're my heart now, Levi May." "But the town," her voice caught, remembering the church's locked doors. "No." Boaz's tone grew firm. "I won't let their shame rule us anymore. Their cruel words don't matter. Only what's true between us matters." Tears slipped down Levi's cheeks. "I was so afraid," she admitted, "that you'd realize they were right about me. That I'm not—" She couldn't finish. "Look at me," Boaz said, his large hand cupping her cheek with infinite tenderness. "You're everything I prayed for, everything I need. I love you, and no amount of gossip will change that." For the first time since the storm, Levi smiled. It was weak, but real. "I believe you," she whispered. "I truly do." The morning of the third day dawned clear and cold. Boaz had just finished spooning more broth into Levi when a knock echoed through the cabin. His body tensed, remembering Deacon Crenshaw's last unwelcome visit. "Who could that be in this weather?" Levi asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. Boaz squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Stay quiet, I'll see." He opened the door to find a stranger on his porch, an older man in a worn black coat, snow dusting his silver hair. A leather satchel hung at his side. "Pardon the intrusion," the man said, removing his hat. "I'm Reverend Daniel Matthews, circuit preacher for these parts. Got caught in the tail end of that storm. Might you spare shelter for a weary traveler?" Boaz studied him carefully before nodding. "Come in, Reverend. We've got warm fire and hot coffee at least." The preacher stomped snow from his boots before entering. His kind eyes took in the cabin's interior, noting Levi propped up in bed and the obvious signs of illness. "I hope I'm not intruding on trouble." "No trouble," Boaz said, though his voice held a hint of wariness. My intended is recovering from a chill." Something in his tone made the Reverend look closer at them both. "There's a story here, I think, if you're willing to share it." So they did. Boaz pulled up a chair while Levi spoke softly from her bed, telling of her father's abandonment, her desperate journey, and the town's cruel rejection. The Reverend's face grew grave as they described the locked church and Levi's flight into the storm. When they finished, he shook his head slowly. "Such cruelty, and in the name of righteousness no less. It grieves my heart to hear it." "We aim to marry proper," Boaz said, "but the town won't have it. Marriage isn't about buildings or crowds," Reverend Matthews said firmly. "It's about two hearts joining before God in truth and love." He paused, looking thoughtful. "If you're willing, I could perform the ceremony right here." Levi's breath caught. "Here, now." The Reverend smiled. "Why not? I'm properly ordained, and this cabin's as holy as any church when filled with honest love. What matters is the vows you speak, not where you speak them." Boaz moved to Levi's side, taking her hand. "What do you say, sweetheart? Will you marry me here, with just God and the good Reverend as witnesses?" Levi's eyes shone with tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh, yes." "Then let me fetch my prayer book," the Reverend said, reaching for his satchel. "Love like yours deserves blessing, no matter what small-minded folk might say." Boaz helped Levi sit up straighter in bed, tucking her mother's quilt around her shoulders like a wedding cloak. She was still pale, but her eyes glowed with happiness as the Reverend opened his book and cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice warm and sure, "we are gathered here in the sight of God." The winter sun streamed through the cabin's windows, making the snow outside sparkle like diamonds. Inside, two hearts finally found their way home. Word spread quickly through the valley that Reverend Matthews had taken shelter at the McGraw cabin. By mid-afternoon, wagon wheels crunched through fresh snow as the first neighbors arrived. Sarah Wilson clutched a steaming apple pie to her chest, her husband Tom following with an armload of split pine for the fire. "Heard tell you're fixing to marry these two," Tom said to the Reverend, stamping snow from his boots at the door. "Reckon we ought to be here for that." More wagons followed. The Hendersons brought wildflowers gathered from their hothouse. Old Mrs. Parker arrived with her famous spice cake and a bundle of dried lavender to sweeten the air. Even some who had turned their backs in town now came forward, shamefaced but bearing gifts, preserves, quilts, baskets of fresh eggs. Inside the cabin, Levi sat wrapped in quilts by the fire, color finally returning to her cheeks. Her eyes widened at each new arrival, hardly daring to believe they had come for her and Boaz. "Let me help you dress, dear," Mrs. Wilson said softly, lifting the muslin wedding gown from where it hung. "Every bride deserves to look her best." In the bedroom, Mrs. Wilson and two other women helped Levi into the simple dress. Their gentle hands smoothed the fabric, and someone produced a blue ribbon for her hair. When they finished, Levi caught her reflection in the window glass. The dress wasn't fancy, but it fit her well, and her eyes shone with joy. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Wilson whispered, squeezing her hand. "Just beautiful." Meanwhile, Boaz changed into his best shirt in the barn, his big fingers fumbling with the buttons. Tom Henderson helped him with his tie, clapping him on the shoulder. "You're doing right by her," he said. "We were wrong to judge." By sunset, the cabin overflowed with warmth and light. Lanterns hung from every beam, their glow soft on the pine walls. Neighbors had rearranged the furniture, creating space before the hearth where Boaz and Levi would stand. The air smelled of pine boughs and spice cake, of coffee brewing and wood smoke. Reverend Matthews stood before the fire, his Bible open in his weathered hands. The crowd grew quiet as Boaz took his place, tall and solemn in his dark suit. When Levi appeared in the bedroom doorway, a collective sigh rose from the gathered neighbors. She walked slowly to join Boaz, her steps steady despite her recent illness. Her muslin dress caught the firelight, and the blue ribbon in her hair matched her bright eyes. Boaz watched her approach, with such naked love on his face that several women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend began again, his voice carrying to every corner of the crowded cabin, "we gather now in God's presence to join these two faithful hearts." He spoke simply but powerfully of love's patient strength, of mercy that outweighs judgment, of grace that finds us in our darkest hours. Every word seemed chosen for Boaz and Levi's journey, and heads nodded in understanding. "The Lord looks not on outward appearance," the Reverend said, "but on the heart. And these two hearts he has clearly blessed and brought together." Boaz's voice shook slightly as he spoke his vows. "I take you, Levi May, to be my wife, to love and cherish, to protect and provide for, until death parts us. What God has given me in you is more than I ever dreamed to ask for." Tears slipped down Levi's cheeks as she responded. "I take you, Boaz McGraw, to be my husband, to love and honor, to stand beside through all weather, until death parts us. You saw worth in me when I had lost all hope, and I will spend my life returning that gift." Someone in the crowd began humming "Amazing Grace," and others joined in. Soon the cabin rang with voices raised in harmony, the old hymn swelling until it seemed the very walls vibrated with joy. "By the authority vested in me," the Reverend proclaimed over the fading notes, "and before these witnesses, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Boaz gathered Levi close, kissing her with infinite tenderness. She lifted her face to his, and in that moment their love transformed the simple cabin into something holy. The crowd erupted in cheers and congratulations. Tables appeared as if by magic, loaded with food. Mrs. Parker's spice cake sat proudly next to 3 different pies. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon laughter and music filled the air. Neighbors who had crossed the street to avoid Levi now pressed forward to hug her, to welcome her properly as Mrs. McGraw. The celebration stretched late into the evening. Lamps burned low as stories were shared. Old hurts mended over coffee and pie. Boaz kept Levi close to his side, his big hand gentle on her back, supporting her still recovering strength. But her eyes sparkled with happiness, and her laugh rang clear above the pleasant din. "Look at them," Mrs. Wilson whispered to her husband. "God's ways are surely mysterious. Who would have thought that storm-tossed girl would bring such light to our valley?" Tom nodded, watching Boaz beam with pride as Levi shared a joke with their neighbors. "Reckon we all learned something about judgment and mercy," he said, "and about love being bigger than our small minds sometimes allow." Outside, snow fell softly in the darkness, but inside the cabin glowed with warmth and welcome. The night that began with 2 hearts joining had somehow managed to heal an entire community. The weeks following their wedding brought gentle changes to the valley. Levi's strength returned with the lengthening days, and her heart for service began to shine. Every Tuesday, she invited the valley's widowers for supper, filling their empty plates and lonely evenings with warmth and conversation. Old Jake Wilson said her rabbit stew reminded him of his Sarah's cooking, and his weathered face softened with memory. The children came too, drawn by her patient smile and clear voice. She taught them hymns on sunny afternoons, their small voices joining hers in Sweet Hour of Prayer and Amazing Grace. Even the most mischievous boys settled when she opened her mother's marked Bible to share stories. When influenza swept through town that March, Levi moved from cabin to cabin, bringing broth and cool cloths. She sat with Mrs. Crenshaw through 3 fever-racked nights, praying and singing softly until the crisis passed. The morning Deacon Crenshaw found his wife's fever broken. He gripped Levi's hand with tears in his eyes. "I was wrong about you," he said simply. "The Lord's mercy flows through your hands, child." Now, as spring painted the valley in tender green, Levi rocked on the cabin's porch beside her husband. Birds called sweetly from budding branches, and the air carried the scent of warming earth. Boaz's strong arm rested across her shoulders, holding her close. "You know something?" he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "The Lord sent me what I needed, not what I ordered," Levi smiled up at him, her eyes bright with joyful tears. The valley spread before them, no longer a place of judgment but of belonging. Here, she had found her true calling, not just as Boaz's beloved wife, but as living proof that mercy's gentle strength could soften the hardest hearts. Thanks for being here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a truth, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another moment that just might speak to your soul.